Imagine a wonderful summer day, the sun giving the world a glow, the leaves waving in the wind with birds chirping and fluttering about. It's around noon. Lunchtime. Traffic in the small town is light and nothing is too busy. You're looking for a place to sit down and have lunch. You walk in after making your choice, a small family restaurant tucking in at the bottom of a hill on the south side of town. You feel the air conditioning take the summer heat off your face. The front counter is lined with stools where you could sit and watch the cooks work, or be first out the door if something villainous happened. Next to the register is a large glass case with cakes and pies, stacks of donuts and candy sprinkles. You're immediately hit with a smell of coffee as you sit down at the counter. The waitress takes your order with a courteous smile. Over her shoulder is an arsenal of soda machines and coffee makers and blenders, stacks of glass and stainless steel. Another waitress hauls an order to a table with two young children on the far side of the dining room. This is the mid-1970s. The title waitress is still culturally acceptable prior to the acceptably androgynous server used today. You look around and watch what's going on. Trucks and cars passing by the windows, the parking lot nearly empty. An old man pulls the plunger on an old-style cigarette machine and returns to his seat. If you are a regular, you're reassured that the place was the same since last you visited. Otherwise, you observe the details of an unfamiliar establishment, a place you've passed by on many occasions but never stopped in. Dark red booths line the large glass windows where customers mind their business. Tables occupy the center of the main dining room, with large chairs and large booths lining the windows and the far wall. There's one large family at the largest table, having a party. The place is rustic and homey, country music coming softly from the overhead speakers, the waitresses with kindly swagger to add familiarity to their courtesy. The door opens and a couple with a young child walk in and immediately sit at one of the booths closest to the bathroom. The older waitress nods to them, already collecting coffee cups and a coffee pot. The couple has been here before, regulars like the old couple they sat next to. You think nothing of this. At the moment, your cheeseburger shows up and your coffee is refilled. Perhaps not a cheeseburger, maybe a chicken fried steak if you've missed breakfast. You mind your food and look over to see an unoccupied newspaper. One of the local mechanics spent his time leafing through the classified ads, then rested his elbow on the paper while he finished his coffee. You open the paper and scan through the headlines. It's not for the news of the day, but catching up on the daily comics, the only worthwhile part of the newspaper. Almost the moment you grab the paper, the couple's child starts up, getting rowdy and noisy. The boy climbs out of the booster seat, teetering over the edge of the booth. There are crayons for kids, but the boy found them useful only as projectiles. You guess the child to be roughly 2 years old. You give the couple another glance. They're threadbare, but not ratty. The mother already showing signs of the future battles with her son. The father, a lean man with black hair and a thin, devilish beard, chatted with someone in the other booth, regulars who occupied this end of the restaurant as their place since early morning. Then the son starts throwing anything within reach off the table, knocking the crayons to the floor, bawling and crying, his face tomato red, his pudgy arms flapping as his mother pulled anything within reach away. After a quick cup of coffee, the couple leave, their son unable to calm down. You watch after them, annoyed. You think to yourself you've never seen a child so out of control. Those two other children at the big table were roughly the same age and were somewhat behaved. Yet this one child was entirely out of control, or would have been had they stayed longer. The child's behavior would eventually change. The story Mother told me about this was specifically tied to the one vacation to San Diego, to SeaWorld. Obviously, I don't remember much of this, being as young as I was, and for the very fact Mother and Father took turns going to dinner or lunch alone. I was so misbehaved and out of control that they couldn't bring me into public without causing a huge scene. When one went to eat, the other stayed in the hotel room, eating what came back in a doggy bag. We lived outside of town, so these regular coffee breaks weren't too regular, but often enough, packing two children into a 1973 Subaru wagon and driving to town for groceries and supplies. There was the truck stop just outside of town, on the interstate between Roseburg and Grants Pass, a health food store with a coffee shop attached to it, and a few other small shops to sit and have coffee. These coffee breaks they took were never explained, becoming more than routine. Perhaps there was an originating reason to do so, or for something to do to get out of the house, an inexpensive entertainment that became habit. For much of this time, in the later half of the 1970s, Mother and Father struggled with low income. The idea of poverty strikes up images of dirt floors and chickens running through the kitchen, photographs of the Dust Bowl, Great Depression era, of tattered shoes and broken faces. It wasn't that bad, but there were instances where it seemed so. Regardless, the child's outrageous behavior stopped during one of these coffee breaks. As per Mother's recollection, she was writing a check to pay for coffee and set the pen down. Either she was distracted, or I hadn't gotten myself properly riled up yet, but the pen was left within reach. The restaurant had these paper placemats, which were always helpful for any number of purposes, Dad scribbling away something he had in a dream, or Mom doing sums of what was left in the checking account. Anyway, she remembered the pen and went to take it from me, and saw I had drawn a series of crude squares and circles what resembled a car. At the age of 2, I had plotted out the basic shape of a car. I hadn't dashed out a statuesque foot, or a heroic figure, or a potted plant, but what was a crude car was certainly different than the tortured scribbles made in crayon. I've been drawing ever since. Apart from drawing cars, drawing comics were my first big obsession. The first comic book I ever attempted was simple, just like any other child's art. Using a ballpoint pen, whatever I could get my hands on, and a school notebook, I bent my face down at the paper and scribbled and scrawled and labored over every crude panel. I grew the idea of making my own comic at the age of 6, from a Crazy Cat collection I found in the attic, a book I still have today. Though it's in shreds, the pages are still complete, the original dust jacket tattered and the binding broken. Both the dust jacket and binding remain, likely in a cardboard box, but the book is in my stack of favorite books. One of the reasons for the sorry state the book fell into was how obsessed I was with it. Since the day I spotted it, I carried it with me wherever I went, stuffing sheets of paper into it for my own drawing. I read and reread favorite stories in the cartoons and empowered myself to any number of ideas inspired from the stories themselves. This was my first inspiration, squares drawn into the paper as windows into another world, whatever world I could think of. Conventional comic books were unknown to me at such a young age, living a relatively isolated childhood in rural Oregon. Pennies were pinched, and time was spent scrimping and saving. I wouldn't confront legitimate comic books until late in adolescence, where I had already fixated on my own vision regardless if it followed the normal formula. This would build on my own formula of doing everything the hard way. The notion of the Crazy Cat collection brings me to what sparked my obsession with drawing itself, and this disorganized path through my development as an artist. All children draw, some better than others, but their imaginations grow to other things. I simply stuck with this.